The history of the fall of man. Join us in exploring the history of the fall of man, from the idyllic Eden to the trials and tribulations that followed Adam and Eve's disobedience. This journey reveals not only the depth of sin and its consequences but also God's unwavering promise of redemption. Discover how this ancient tale resonates with messages of hope and salvation, reflecting humanity's eternal quest to reconnect with its Creator. Chapter 1: Creation. Initially, the void and darkness filled the abyss with the cosmos. The presence of God hovered over the primordial waters, a spectrum of infinite potential about to unfold. With the word, "Let there be light," light was made, cutting through the darkness with pure and divine clarity. This act marked the first day of creation, a sequence of events that would unfold the majesty of the universe in just 6 days. Each day, God calls into existence new wonders: the heavens and the earth, plants and trees, the stars of the sky, the creatures of the sea and air, and finally, the land animals. The climax of this divine masterpiece came on the 6th day, when God, in an act of love and purpose, created man and woman in His image and likeness. He breathed life into them, endowing them with a spark of divinity, a spirit capable of loving, creating, and discerning. These first human beings, Adam and Eve, were given dominion over all creation and a sacred responsibility to care for and preserve the garden world entrusted to them. In this perfect setting, harmony reigned. God, humanity, and creation existed in a relationship of mutual respect and love. There was no death, no pain, only the pure beauty of life in its fullest expression. Eden was a living testimony of God's power, wisdom, and love, a reflection of heaven on earth. On the 7th day, God rested, not out of fatigue, but as a solemn act of completeness and sanctification. This day of rest marked the end of creation and established a rhythm of life, a sacred cycle of work and rest. In this final act of creation, God not only gifted the world to humanity but also time, a treasure that allows His creatures to reflect, enjoy, and celebrate the work of His hands. Creation, in its essence, is a perpetual invitation to partake in the joy and love of the Creator, a call to live in harmony with Him, with ourselves, and with all that dwells under the sky. Chapter 2: The Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was a terrestrial paradise, created by God as a home for Adam and Eve, the first human beings. This garden was an extension of heaven, a place of unmatched beauty and perfection, where every tree, every flower, and every water source distilled the very essence of life. In the midst of this garden, God planted 2 trees of special significance: the tree of life, granting eternal life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, whose fruit was the only one forbidden to Adam and Eve. God gave them the freedom to eat from any tree in the garden, except the latter, thus establishing a test of obedience and trust. Adam and Eve lived in harmony with creation, tending the garden and enjoying a direct and unmediated relationship with God. There was no shame or fear; both were naked and not ashamed, for innocence and purity enveloped their existence. In this state of grace, they carried out their daily labor with joy, naming the animals and cultivating the land, thus fulfilling the divine mandate to exercise dominion over the earth. The communication between God and humanity was direct and without barriers. In the cool of the evening, it is said that God Himself walked through the garden, seeking the company of Adam and Eve and conversing with them in the freshness of the day. This intimate relationship was the foundation of life in Eden, a life without wants or sufferings, where Adam and Eve's needs were fully met. However, this idyll was not merely passive. Adam and Eve had the mission to cultivate and care for the garden, a task that provided them with purpose and satisfaction. In this labor, God's desire for humanity to enjoy His creation and actively participate in it was revealed. Through their work, Adam and Eve were co-creators with God, extending the order and beauty of Eden. This perfect balance between humans and nature, work and rest, obedience and freedom, formed the framework for an existence in perfect harmony with the Creator, anticipating the fullness of life promised by obedience to His only prohibition. Chapter 3: The Temptation. In the serenity of the Garden of Eden, harmony was put to the test by the cunning presence of the serpent, the most cunning of all creatures that the Lord God had made. Its ability to sow doubts and deception was manifested in an insidious dialogue with Eve, in which it questioned the divine instructions. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? This initial questioning opened a breach in the trust and obedience that Adam and Eve owed their Creator, using the seed of curiosity and the desire for autonomy to divert them from their path. The serpent, with its enveloping and seductive language, promised Eve that by eating the forbidden fruit, they would not die. On the contrary, they would be like gods, knowing good and evil. The temptation to achieve wisdom and power similar to gods, to be autonomous in discernment and not depend on divine guidance, was the lure that captured Eve's attention. Looking at the fruit, which was pleasing to the eyes and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it, and not content with disobeying alone, she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. This act of rebellion was not only a transgression of a command but also the beginning of a profound fracture in the relationship between humanity and God. Adam and Eve's disobedience introduced sin into the world, a poison that would corrupt the perfect creation and alter the very essence of humanity. The innocence and transparency that characterized life in Eden were overshadowed by the awareness of good and evil, a duality that would bring shame, fear, and guilt. The moment Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit marked a before and after in the history of humanity. The serpent, using cunning over force, managed to make the first couple question God's goodness and authority. This act of pride and disobedience not only changed the destiny of Adam and Eve but laid the foundations for the spiritual and moral conflict that every human being would face. The temptation and fall are not merely episodes of the past, but eternal examples of the struggle between obedience to God and the inclination to follow our desires, a battle waged in the heart of each person. Chapter 4: The Fall. The consummation of the forbidden act by Adam and Eve triggered a series of internal revelations and drastic changes in the Garden of Eden. For the first time, their eyes were opened not only to the knowledge of good and evil but also to the awareness of their nakedness. This new perception of themselves, far from being an enlightenment, became a source of shame and fear. In a desperate attempt to cover their nakedness, they sewed fig leaves together, making the first garments for humanity. This symbolic act reflected a deeper loss. The original innocence and perfect harmony with creation and the Creator had been shattered. The change in Adam and Eve's relationship with God was made more palpable when, upon hearing the voice of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day, instead of running towards Him as was their custom, they hid among the trees. The dialogue that followed revealed the depth of the fracture. God, already aware of what had happened, asked Adam, "Where are you?" A question that went beyond physical location, pointing to the spiritual and emotional state in which he found himself. Adam confessed his fear and shame, pointing not only to the woman as the one who gave him the fruit, but also implying that it was God who provided the companion who led him astray. The excuses and cross-blame among Adam, Eve, and the serpent did not mitigate the consequences of their actions. God pronounced specific sentences for each one, marking the beginning of a harsher and more painful existence for humanity and altering creation itself. The serpent was cursed among all animals, condemned to crawl on its belly and to face eternal enmity between its offspring and that of the woman. Eve would face intensified pains in childbirth and a conflict-ridden relationship with Adam, who, in turn, would bear the weight of a now hostile land, which would only produce fruits among thorns and thistles, under the sweat of his brow. This moment of confrontation not only marked the end of humanity's stay in Eden, but also represented the beginning of a constant struggle against the consequences of sin. The fall fundamentally altered the nature of human existence, introducing suffering, hard work, and death as inevitable realities. However, Amidst divine justice, a ray of hope was glimpsed, the promise of enmity between the serpent and the offspring of the woman, a harbinger of redemption and future victory over evil. This promise, veiled already, would become the thread of the salvation history, a light in the darkness introduced by disobedience in the garden. Chapter 5. The Consequences. The divine verdict on Adam, Eve, and the serpent established not only the immediate repercussions of their disobedience but also the fundamental conditions of human existence outside of Eden. For Eve, the promise of increased pain in childbirth symbolized the complexity of life and human relationships that would stem from the fall. Motherhood, in its beauty and challenge, would become a constant reminder of the consequences of sin, as well as humanity's ability to overcome and find meaning even amidst suffering. Adam faced a curse on the land where he would work. The soil, once cooperative and fertile, would now resist, producing thorns and thistles as a testament to human rebellion. The sweat of his brow would be necessary to extract sustenance from the land, reflecting a reality where work and effort are intertwined with the experience of life. This transformation marked not only a change in humanity's relationship with nature but also introduced the notion of labor as a means of survival and purpose. The enmity between the serpent and humanity transcended a literal dispute between humans and snakes, symbolizing the eternal struggle between good and evil, light and darkness. This animosity, implanted in the heart of creation, would be a constant source of conflict but also of heroism and redemption, as future generations faced and overcame the challenges posed by sin. Despite the severity of the consequences, the narrative does not end in despair. God's act of clothing Adam and Eve with skins before expelling them from the garden was a gesture of care and protection, a hint of his enduring mercy. This act symbolized the recognition of their vulnerability and divine provision in the face of the new realities they would face. Thus, even in the act of punishment, God sowed the seeds of redemption, ensuring that, although the relationship between the Creator and creation was damaged, it was not completely broken. The expulsion from Eden, then, was not only a consequence of disobedience but also an act of grace. By preventing Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of life and living eternally in their fallen state, God preserved the possibility of redemption. Life outside the garden would be filled with challenges, but also with opportunities to grow, learn, and eventually be redeemed. The history of humanity, marked by sin from its beginnings, would equally be marked by the search for restoration and the longing to return to full communion with God, a journey that would continue through generations. Chapter 6. The Exile from Eden. The expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden marked the beginning of a new era for humanity, an existence apart from the immediate presence of God and the perfection of the earthly paradise. The gate of Eden was closed behind them, guarded by cherubim and the flaming sword, powerful symbols of a profound and painful separation, but also of the holiness and protection of what had been left behind. This exile was not just physical but spiritual, representing a rupture in the direct communion with God that had been the hallmark of their existence in the garden. Life outside Eden presented immediate and overwhelming challenges. Adam and Eve found themselves in a world that, while beautiful, was radically different from what they had known. The land, now cursed by disobedience, required constant and laborious work to produce food. The seasons changed, introducing the heat of summer and the cold of winter, each with its trials and tribulations. Mortality became a palpable reality, a constant shadow reminding them of the price of their transgression. Despite these challenges, Adam and Eve began to adapt to their new reality, learning to cultivate the land, gather its fruits, and raise animals. In this challenging environment, they found new forms of resilience and creativity, forging the first tools and laying the foundations of human civilization. Their relationship, though complicated by the tensions predicted by God, remained a central pillar in their lives, a reminder of their common origin and shared destiny. Procreation became a source of hope and a challenge for Adam and Eve, a way to perpetuate their legacy and face the promise of redemption. The arrival of their children, Cain and Abel, represented both the continuation of life and the complexity of human relationships marked by sin. Through parenthood, they experienced joy and pain in new ways, facing the joys and challenges of raising a generation born outside of paradise, in a world where good and evil struggled for supremacy in the human heart. This exile from Eden, though tragic, also served as a catalyst for human growth and development. The need to work the land, face adversities, and live in relation to others became a school of character and faith. Amid their pain and struggle, Adam and Eve and their descendants began to understand more deeply their dependence on God, learning about mercy, justice, and hope through their life experiences. Thus, the exile from Eden, though marked by loss, opened a path toward a more profound understanding of human purpose and the need for redemption, a theme that would unfold throughout the history of salvation. Chapter 7. Life outside Eden. Adam and Eve, now removed from the paradise of Eden, faced the reality of an existence marked by toil and sweat. This new world, though filled with natural beauty, was also a terrain of unceasing challenges. The couple had to adapt quickly, learning to cultivate the land, hunt, and gather food in an environment that did not offer its fruits as generously as the garden they once called home. Through their labor, they not only cultivated the land but also their souls, in a constant process of learning and adapting to the consequences of their disobedience. The offspring of Adam and Eve marked the beginning of human society, a complex network of relationships and responsibilities. Cain and Abel, the first children of this foundational couple, represented two divergent ways of life. One became a farmer, the other a shepherd. Through them and their offerings to God, the first hints of faith, worship, and the complexity of the human heart were revealed. God's acceptance of Abel's offering and rejection of Cain's underscored the importance of intention and sincerity in man's relationship with the divine, prefiguring the tensions that would arise in future generations. The rivalry between Cain and Abel culminated in the first act of mortal violence, Abel's murder by his brother. This tragic event not only demonstrated the extreme consequences of the original sin but also marked humanity with a stain of violence and envy that would resonate through the ages. God's response to this act, a combination of punishment and protection for Cain, reflected the complexity of divine justice, highlighting both the consequences of sin and the continuity of mercy. As Adam and Eve saw their family grow, they experienced both the joy of a new life and the pain of discord and loss. Their lives, woven with threads of love, challenge, and hope, became the archetype of the human experience. The multiplication of their descendants filled the earth, each generation facing its challenges and contributing to the complex tapestry of human history. The narrative of Adam and Eve and their children became a powerful reflection on human nature, responsibility, and the constant search for meaning and redemption. Life outside Eden, therefore, was not simply a story of punishment and loss but also one of growth, learning, and the persistent presence of God's grace. Through the vicissitudes of human life, from daily work to family interactions, lessons of faith, strength, and the possibility of redemption were woven. The history of humanity, though marked by the fall, continued to move forward, driven by hope and the promise of a restored future, a persistent echo of the garden lost but never completely forgotten. Chapter 8. Cain and Abel. The story of Cain and Abel, sons of Adam and Eve, serves as an early mirror of the complexity of the human heart and the depths to which it can fall due to sin. Cain, the farmer, and Abel, the shepherd, represented two distinct ways of life, but it was in their offerings that the true nature of their hearts was revealed. Abel offered to God the best of his flock, an act of genuine faith and devotion, while Cain presented the fruits of the land without the same level of sincerity or sacrifice. The divine acceptance of Abel's offering and rejection of Cain's unleashed a spiral of jealousy and anger in Cain's heart, emotions that ultimately led him to commit the first murder of humanity. This act of violence was not just the result of a momentary outburst. It was the culmination of a series of decisions and attitudes that strayed from God's established path. In God's response to Cain, before the murder, we find a warning and an opportunity for repentance. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. However, Cain chose to ignore this warning, allowing sin to take control of his actions, resulting in a tragedy that would affect his family and future generations. The punishment imposed on Cain by God was severe, but it also contained elements of grace. Marked to protect him from vengeance, Cain was condemned to wander as a fugitive and a wanderer, a life that reflected the physical and spiritual distance from God. Despite this, Cain built a city, laying the foundations of human civilization, though one that was marked from its beginnings by sin and conflict. The story of Cain and Abel is a powerful illustration of how actions guided by negative emotions can have devastating consequences, not just for the individuals involved but for the entire society. At the same time, it shows that, despite the depth of sin, God's mercy remains available, offering protection and the possibility of a new beginning, albeit in altered circumstances. The narrative reminds us of the importance of cultivating a heart that seeks sincerity and goodness and is aware of the consequences of its actions. Through the story of these two brothers, we are taught a lasting lesson about personal responsibility, divine justice, and the possibility of redemption, even in the direst circumstances. Chapter 9. The Descendants of Adam. The genealogy of Adam, extending from Seth to Noah, represents a chronicle of humanity that survives and propagates despite living in a world marked by sin. Seth, born after the tragic fate of Abel and the exile of Cain, symbolized for Adam and Eve a new hope and the continuation of their lineage. Through Seth and his descendants, the line of those who sought to live in the sight of God, maintaining faith and hope amid an increasingly distant world from the perfection of Eden, is traced. The Bible carefully records the descendants of Adam through Seth, detailing the generations that led to Noah. This genealogy is not just a list of names. It is a testament to human resilience, the ability to move forward despite difficulties, and the persistence of the divine promise through the ages. Among these figures stands out Enoch, who walked with God and was taken to heaven without seeing death, a symbol of the intimate communion with the divine that was still possible for humanity. The longevity of the antediluvian ancestors, with lives that extended for hundreds of years, suggests an era of humanity markedly different from our current experience. These long years of life allowed for significant expansion and development of the human population but also saw the rise of sin, as generations increasingly strayed from the divine ideals established at the beginning of creation. The descendants of Adam, therefore, become a chronicle of duality. On the one hand, the impressive ability of humanity to adapt, survive, and grow. On the other, the inevitable tendency towards sin and moral degeneration. The story of these generations is a preparation for the next great act of judgment and mercy from God, the flood, intended to purify the earth of rampant sin, but also to preserve a remnant through which the promise of redemption could continue. This narrative of the descendants of Adam underscores a central truth of Judeo-Christian faith. Human history is a complex interplay between the freedom given by God and the choices made by man, between divine justice and mercy, between judgment and the promise of salvation. Through the vicissitudes of these generations, the hope of restoration and final reconciliation is maintained, an echo of Eden that resonates through the centuries, reminding humanity of its divine origin and eternal destiny. Chapter 10. The Increase in Sin. As the generations of Adam's descendants multiplied upon the face of the earth, sin also grew exponentially in the heart of humanity. This increase in sin was not merely quantitative but qualitative, manifesting increasingly complex and destructive forms of evil. Violence, corruption, and moral depravity became so rampant that creation itself seemed to groan under the weight of human iniquity. Society, in its estrangement from God, had almost completely lost sight of holiness and justice, plunging into a destructive cycle of sin that threatened to unravel the very fabric of creation. In this context, the figure of Noah emerges as a beacon of righteousness and obedience to God. Described as a righteous man, blameless among his generations, Noah walked with God in a world that had turned its back on its Creator. The divine choice of Noah to build the ark, a monumental task in the face of an announced flood that would cleanse the earth of its corruption, symbolizes both an act of judgment and mercy. Through Noah, God sought to preserve a seed of humanity that could restore creation to its original purpose, a remnant that would keep alive the promise of redemption. The flood, then, represents a pivotal moment in the history of salvation. It is both a response to the unrestrained increase in sin and a reaffirmation of God's commitment to the life and inherent goodness of His creation. Despite the severity of the judgment, the preservation of Noah and his family, along with representatives of all living creation in the ark, underscores divine mercy and the hope of a new beginning. The waters of the flood, while erasing the wickedness of the earth, also set the stage for a new covenant between God and humanity, symbolized by the rainbow that follows the recession of the waters. The story of the increase in sin and divine judgment through the flood is, therefore, a narrative of warning and hope. It warns of the devastating consequences of disobedience and estrangement from God, while offering hope in the possibility of redemption and restoration. This chapter of human history highlights God's enduring grace, which, even in the midst of judgment, seeks to save and sustain creation. Thus, the flood becomes not just the end of an era marked by sin but the harbinger of a new beginning, in which the relationship between God and humanity could be rebuilt on firmer foundations, promising a future of complete reconciliation through the promise of redemption that runs throughout Scripture.